Hi, my name's Jessica, and thanks for watching today. Before we get started, we wanted to fill you in on our church. Here at Grace, we have a mission and a purpose. Our goal is to help people discover truth, decide on Jesus, demonstrate change, and deploy for others. If you're looking for a church, we would love for you to come and be a part of what God is doing here at Grace. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. We would also like to invite you to one of our Sunday morning services. Check out ohiograce.com for a list of campuses and service times in your area. We have a great time gathering for music, hanging out, and learning about who God is and how that affects our lives. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.
Well, hey, how you guys doing this morning? Dang, okay. Everybody's awake after the 4th of July long weekend. All right, appreciate that. Last week, we had some good news, some great news to share. And that was kind of our next step for our church here, as really in general, between all three campuses, how we are launching a new campus, a fourth campus in Sandusky. We are pumped about that. We got the building, there it is. We were able to purchase that. And I told you guys last week, this was from a church that died, okay? And so we're here and we're going to try to bring it back to life. And so that's our plan. And we will be launching that we'll be launching that September of 25, so in about a year, and we're going to get everything all ready and try to do it right. So we're excited to do that. We're excited to see God do in Sandusky what he has clearly done here in Tiffin just through a few short years, and so we are pumped. And I got some other good news for you guys. You guys ready? Yeah. Okay. All right, for the last 8 months or so, we have been painstakingly looking for a guy to come help lead our Fuse student ministries, and we finally got one. All right, a couple weeks ago, we hired a guy named Noah. Here we got Noah and his wife, Morgan. Noah is going to lead our student ministries. He is actually a youth pastor in Canton right now, and he's actually from the area, so for him, it's like he gets to move back home. He is pumped, and he will be starting here in mid-August, and so if you're a middle school or high school student, I'm just telling you, he is pumped to see you guys. And what's also cool about it is I convinced him somehow to go on the high school trip next week, and so, so he's going. He's not working here yet at that point, but he's going, and he's going to spend the weekend down in West Virginia doing all the sorts of things that they're doing, rafting and caving and high ropes course and all that kind of stuff. He's going to be down there with them, getting to know our students, and so we are excited for that. By the way, if you are a student, kind of like what Mike is saying, we got I think 2 spots left. All right, so if you want to go, all right, let's get in this. Let's do this. And you can talk to me or Mike after the service, and we will help you to get there. We'll make that happen, okay, if you're interested. And so that, I think they leave next Sunday, and they'll be coming back on Thursday. So we're excited about that. That is, I'm just telling you, for me, some of you guys, maybe this doesn't affect at all, but for me, this is really good news, all right? That means I don't have to make slushies after third service every Sunday, and I'm excited about that, okay? But we are pumped, and we're so excited for Noah to get here, and he is ready to get on the ground running, and he's got a bunch of great ideas, and it's just going to be a really, really good thing for us, and so excited about that. Now, I got a question for you guys. You guys ready? The question, how many of you guys, and I want you to be honest, okay, how many of you guys have trouble once in a while remembering things? Is that a thing? Well, you don't have to raise your hand. Okay, everybody around you already knows. Okay, but I mean, we have trouble forgetting things. One thing I've noticed about myself is I feel like all the adults in here have said this before. Just a second, all right? I was gonna say, I feel like the older I get, how many times have you heard that phrase? The more I find myself forgetting just kind of like normal things. This week, I, even more than just like, where did I put my keys, where did I put my wallet, that type of thing. Just this week, I had a buddy of mine, we were talking on the phone, and he was like, hey, do you remember that one time that we were doing this one thing, we went to this one place, and we did this, we did this thing, and I was like, and it was one of those things where I'm like, man, I don't remember this at all, and then I started thinking about it, and you like, go to like the recesses of your memories, you're like, man, I vaguely remember that. I haven't thought about this for 20 years or whatever. You're just like, oh yeah, why do we do that? And he was like, are you kidding me? You don't remember this? And so he's telling me like the reason why we went and all this type of thing, all this type of stuff. And I was trying to come up with this yesterday, and I'm like, what was that again? I don't even remember what he was telling me about. And so I texted him, and I'm like, hey, what was that thing that you were reminding me of that I didn't remember and I still don't remember right now, just a few days ago? And he was like, his text back to me was like, I can't remember at all right? I'm like, you were the one reminding me, okay? See, we are prone to forget. Like, this is just who we are. It's a problem. It's just a part of us. And maybe, I was thinking this week, I was like, maybe that's one of the reasons why Luke documents Jesus' life. Sure, he's heard the rumors and he's heard the stories. I get that, and he wants to write this all down. And we already know from the beginning, right at the front, he says, hey, I'm writing this to this man named Theophilus, right? And so that he can know the things that he has heard about Jesus and all the stories and all the rumors, that he can know that those things are actually true, because Luke's saying, I went out and I investigated and I sat down with the eyewitnesses, I tracked them down, and I had the hard conversations and asked them the tough questions. And so he's saying, so you can know. But I also think that probably Luke, maybe the reason why he's writing this stuff down is also so that he won't forget, so that we won't forget. See, weeks ago, we watched Jesus as he began his journey towards Jerusalem, where he knows he's going to be killed. Right? He knows he's going to be killed there. And then we watched him ride into Jerusalem as a king. Right? He does this on a Sunday. We call this Palm Sunday. And he rides in, and there's crowds upon crowds upon crowds of people. Everybody is celebrating Jesus coming in, and everybody thinks that he's going to be king. And they're waving palm branches, and they're screaming, they're shouting, and they're singing. And everybody is just going crazy, except for the religious leaders who hated Jesus. Because remember, the religious leaders, for them, this was a time when the religious elite were using religion for their own money and for their own power. And Jesus refused to be a part of it. All right, he just did. And so he goes up on the next day, on Monday, and he goes up and he clears the temple. All right, they had turned the temple into like a marketplace. And so he goes and he clears all of that out. And he does this at the most financially lucrative time of the year to buy and sell stuff. Remember, this is the Passover week. All right, that's a huge Jewish festival. It lasts for about a week, and that hundreds of thousands of Jewish people from all over the world would descend upon Jerusalem. I mean, so for them, this is like peak tourist season. Like, this is the time where you make all your money. And not only does Jesus clear the temple, but then he starts teaching in the temple publicly, like every day. Right, he teaches in there on Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then Thursday. And many times, some of the things that he is saying is he is teaching against the religious leaders, like in their own turf, right? In their own home. And here he is. He has shamed them. He has publicly offended them, and he has hurt them financially, and they've had enough, and they want him dead. And the question is, how? It's something that has to be done secretly, right? Because he's so popular, right? All the crowds of people, they would never let this happen. I mean, it's not like they could just arrest him. There will be a riot, right? And so it has to be done quietly. It's going to be difficult, but for them, they're like, he's got to go. And we got to take care of this. And so they get an inside man, one of Jesus' own best friends, and they to show them when would be the best time to arrest Jesus, and to show them where he goes when the crowd is not around to protect him and the stage is set. And Luke tells us this in Luke 22. It says, then the day of unleavened bread came when the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. All right, this is a specific day. All right, this would have been on Thursday and of the week-long festival. And on this day, he says, Jesus sent Peter and John and saying, hey, I want you guys to go make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Now, the Passover, just to kind of get us all on the same page here, this was the highlight of Judaism like each year. I mean, they still celebrate even to this day. It was a huge celebration for the Jewish people. And what they would do is during the Passover is that they would retell the story of how God rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt and how he led them to the promised land. And this happened about 1,500 years before the time of Jesus. We read about this in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus. And many of you guys know how that story goes, right? Remember a few years ago, it was 2 years ago when we did a series on a guy named Joseph, all right? It was through a series of events with a guy named Joseph that the Jewish people find themselves as slaves in Egypt. And they were slaves as a people, all right, for 400 years. They were stuck there. And eventually, the Jewish people in general, they start crying out to God, and God hears them. And so God calls this dude named Moses, all right, Moses, he says, hey, I want you to go. I'm going to use you to free my people. And Moses, at first, he doesn't even want to go. At first, he tells God no, which is not a good idea. And eventually, Moses, he goes anyway. And God says, Moses, I want you to lead them out. And Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he says, hey, Pharaoh, I just want to let you know that God tells me to tell you to let his people go. And Pharaoh, when he hears this, he's just like, no, no thanks. I don't know what God you talk to, but pretty sure my gods are all about them staying here and building all my stuff, okay? So so he says no. And so God eventually sends 9 plagues upon Israel, and these are and it's like each plague kind of builds upon the other. And just all these terrible things happen to the people of Egypt. And after those 9 plagues, Pharaoh still says no. And so God sends one more. And this one was the worst one. And this one was the one that was going to convince Pharaoh to let him go. And this is where the firstborn in each family dies, right? That's in animals, that's people. I mean, it's everybody. And even the Jewish people, if they don't do what God tells them to do. And so God tells Moses, he says, hey, tell my people, all right, I want them to sacrifice a little innocent lamb. All right, this is going to represent their sins because sin is very serious to me. And then I want you to take the blood of that lamb and I want you to spread it over the doorpost of your house. And if you do that and if you do it the right way, I will pass over your house and you will be safe. You get where Passover is coming from, where the name is, right? God's going to pass over them. And so that's exactly what happened, right? That night that it happens, after that night, Pharaoh, he calls Moses in and he begs them to leave. He says, you guys get out of here. I don't want to see you again. You guys need to leave after he loses his son, oldest son. And so God tells the Jewish people to celebrate this each and every year. He says, I want you to remember, because you are prone to forget, I want you to remember what I did for you. And at this point, the Jewish people have been celebrating this festival for like 1,500 years. And Jerusalem is filled with people. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people, again, from all over the world that are in Jerusalem. And Jesus and his disciples, they are also there to celebrate just as God had commanded. And so Jesus, he's like, hey, we got to get ready. All right, this is like Thanksgiving meal. Like some of you moms, I'm not picking on moms. I'm just saying, like for Thanksgiving meal, like it just doesn't happen on its own, right? Like it takes a little bit of work, right? Yeah. Oh, okay, all right, good. The same thing here. Jesus is like, hey, who's going to do the work? And lucky Peter and lucky John, they get the short straw. And he says, hey, I want you guys to go and get ready for the Passover meal. And so they ask him, they're like, where? Like, where do you want us to prepare it? Okay, like we don't, like this, they're in Jerusalem. There's like, all the hotels are booked. Like there's no space here. Where do you want us to do this at? And so Jesus, he says, all right, listen, all right, I got a plan here. He says, when you enter the city, that's Jerusalem, he says, a man will be there carrying a water jug and he's going to meet you. And then just follow him. All right, at this point, I think the disciples are kind of used to some of this stuff, but they're just like, Jesus, is going to be so weird. Follow him to where? All right, what's his name? What's he look like? Where are we going? It's funny because Jesus doesn't give them any of that. He's just like, no, you don't need to know his name. Just he's going to be carrying a water jug. Like that's all you need to know. Like follow that guy, And they're like, dude, Jesus, just a few days ago, remember, Jesus had them steal a donkey, okay? So that's probably still fresh in their mind. And people are like, what are you doing? They're like, Jesus told us to. And they're like, oh, yeah. Just all this stuff. And so they're just like, okay, so we're going to follow him where? We're going to follow him into the house that he enters, Jesus says. Just go right into the house. He walks in, you go in right in. They're like, oh, this is so awkward. He says, then I want you to tell the owner of that house that the teacher, that's what they described Jesus, because that's what he did, right? He taught. The teacher asks you, hey, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover with my disciples? And then he will show you a large furnished room upstairs. He says, go ahead and make the preparations there. All right, that's where we're going to do it. And so they went. It was awkward. It was going to be weird. But they obeyed, and they went anyway. And they found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. And so Jesus, he sends Peter and John, they go do this, and a few hours later, after Jesus is done teaching in the temple for the day, because that's what he was doing throughout this week, Jesus and his disciples, they arrive and they head upstairs to this room. And Peter and John, they have everything ready. Okay, the turkey, it's all, they got the mashed potatoes. They got it all set. Okay, they got the meal. It wasn't that, but you get what I'm saying. All right, they got it all cooked, all ready. And Jesus, Luke tells us that when the hour came, he reclined at the table. All right, so here they are. They're at this table. It's not a hurry-up meal here. All right, this isn't like, hey, we got to get in, we got to get out. Jesus like, I got a big night tonight. Okay, that's not what's going on here. This is where they're sitting there and they're enjoying themselves. Okay, this is a take your time type meal. And the apostles or the disciples, they were with him. It says, then he said to them, he says, guys, can you picture this in your mind? They're all sitting at this table. All right, they're all reclining at the table. And they're all there. And he looks around and he's got them all and he says, guys, you don't understand. I have fervently desired. This is more of like, hey, I want this. I'm ready to eat. I'm hungry. All right, this is more than just like, I've been looking forward. This is like I've been craving this moment. All right, I've been looking forward to this moment for so long. It's like, if you're going on a sweet vacation or something, you know what I'm talking about? Where you're just like, man, I cannot wait. You're just trying to get through this work week. You're trying to get done with work. You're just like, I just got to get through this week, and then I'm free. You get what I'm saying? You felt that before? All right, that's kind of how Jesus feels. He's like, I have craved this moment. I have desired this moment. I have desired to eat this Passover meal with you before I suffer. And everybody's sitting at the table except for Jesus. They're all thinking the same thing. They're like, huh? What you talking about suffering? Where's suffering? Where's that in? Where's that come in? What's that got to do with anything? Remember, at this point, the disciples, they all think the same thing, even though Jesus has been telling them over and over and over again that he's going to go and he's going to die and it's going to be this big old thing and he's going to come back to life. Even the disciples, they still don't understand. They still think that he is going to be crowned king. And that he's going to free Israel politically, and they're going to, he's going to rise up, and all these people are going to follow him, and they're going to pull away from Rome and declare themselves a new kingdom again, and Israel's going to be back on the map. Like that's what they think. And Jesus is going to be their king, and he's going to be their president, and he's going to rule, and they're all going to follow him, and they're going to get some sweet, government job, in the EPA or whatever, whatever Jesus has. I don't know if Jesus is going to have the EPA, but, like that type of thing, some sweet government job where they can kind of do whatever they want. And so they are pumped about that. And here's Jesus. He's talking about suffering. And they're just like, what? Why do you keep talking about this stuff, Jesus? He says, for I tell you that I will not eat it again. I will not eat again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Meaning he's saying, hey, next time I eat a dinner like this, with you guys, it's actually going to be a long time from now. It's going to be at the end of time. It's going to be when I come back, which, by the way, is still in our future. And the disciples, they don't understand, all right? Just like for us, we're like, are you, what's he trying to say? All right, just like it's hard for us to understand. And then, they're just like, hey, he's suffering. Here he is. He's talking about all this stuff. It's already been kind of an awkward day, at least for Peter and John. And they're just like, what is going on here? And then Jesus does something really weird, right? John actually tells us in his account, because John documents part of Jesus' life too. John was there at the table this very night. John tells us that at this moment, Jesus gets up from the table, and he actually shows these 12 guys who are all like in their early 20s, they're all young, what it looks like to love. And he didn't preach a sermon, and he didn't grant all their wishes, and there were no miracles. No, what he did was he dressed as a servant, as if he was in the lowest position, and he walked around and he washed their feet. Now, for us, it's kind of weird. We got to understand how they did dinner back then. Back then, if you went to like a big dinner, or you had something like this, all right, they had like short little tables, okay? So you got little tables, you had like pillows and cushions all around. And so you kind of lounge around. That's why Luke says they were reclining at the table. All right, not a bad way probably to eat. Now that I think about it, you're kind of reclining and you're just eating off your elbow, like that type of thing. And the bad thing about it is like everybody's feet's like all up in your table. You know what I'm talking about? Like no one wants that. No one wants to deal with that. And so what they had to do is they would wash their feet, okay? Their feet would be gross and all that. And you don't want that near your food. And so on this night, the disciples, they show up and everybody's waiting. They're all like, hey, where's the servant? Where's like the lowest person? Where's the dude that's gonna come wash their feet, right? Like we eating, we gotta wash up. Like that's how it works. But nobody steps up to do it. It's kind of like when you have your first kid. You remember how that is, and you're sleeping at night, and you hear out of the baby monitor, the beginning rumblings of the kids waking up. Get what I'm saying? And what do? You fake sleep, hoping the other person will get it. Because you don't want to get up, right? That's how this is. Nobody wants to get up. Nobody wants to do this job, right? Nobody wants to wash feet. And so here, Jesus, think about this. Jesus gets up. Jesus takes off his outer shirt. Jesus ties a towel around his waist, and Jesus gets on his knee, and he washes his disciples' feet, even Judas's feet, who is going to betray him in just a few short hours. Now, this would have been super, super, super awkward. I mean, again, this is the person with the lowest rank in the room. This would be their job, to wash the feet. And here is the Messiah. Here is their Savior. Here is the God of the universe on his knee doing the dirty job. It's embarrassing for the disciples. It's uncomfortable for them. In fact, Peter, he's like, no, Jesus, you ain't doing this. What you doing? No. He's like, no, thanks. Right? I mean, this is against all cultural norms. And then he took bread after he gets up, and he gave thanks, and he broke it, and he gave it to him. He passes it around. Now, at this point, the disciples, they're ready for some long sermon that they had heard ever since they were like a little kid. They're like, oh, yeah, we know how this goes. All right, he's going to retell the story of the Exodus and the 10 plagues and how God was like rescuing his people. And some of them are like, okay, how's that story go again? Jesus probably probably tells it the best since he was there. All right, but Jesus, he doesn't go there. All right, what Jesus says is so against their culture. What Jesus says is so against the way that they think. What Jesus says is so against everything that they had ever been taught. Jesus says, he says, this is my body. As he hands them the bread, he says, which is given for you. He says, do this in remembrance of me. Now, for us, this sounds totally normal. We're like, oh, yeah, communion, we got this. I know, I've heard this 1,000 times. All right, but for them, all right, this was crazy. In fact, this was borderline blasphemous in their minds. I mean, this would be like me coming up here at Christmas and be like, what's up, church? How you guys doing? Hey, instead of celebrating Jesus' birth, we're going to start celebrating my birth. Okay, so this is my birthday. I want you guys to celebrate this on Christmas. This is going to replace that, okay? Kind of messed up, right? Okay, Chris thinks so. Everybody else is like, oh, yeah, we should do that. You can do that, all right? That's what Jesus is doing here, right? Jesus is saying, hey, instead of remembering what happened 1,500 years ago, he's like, no. From now on, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. And the disciples are like, what are you talking about? You're here. How would we forget you? Like, they don't understand any of this. See, what God did for the Jewish people, what they don't understand is that what God did for the Jewish people 1,500 years ago, he is about to do for the entire world. Just like he saved them, he's about to save everybody. Only this time he's going to suffer, and this time he's going to die, and he's going to do it for them, and he's did it for you and for me. See, Jesus is saying, hey, you don't know what I'm talking about yet? I get that. I understand that, but I want you to remember what I'm about to do for you, because it is a really, really, really big deal. And so I want you to do this to remember me. And we still do this here at Grace. I mean, churches all over the place do this to this day. It's interesting when you compare other churches, and a lot of you guys have been to different churches. Some churches teach that communion is one of those things that it gets you right with God, okay? Or communion is one of those things that you could do to like someday it'll get you to heaven. Or if you're a Catholic maybe in the past or went to a Catholic church, it's like, hey, this communion, like the bread and the juice, it actually turns into Jesus' body and Jesus' like blood, and which is different to think about. But think about it, all right? When we do that, what are we actually doing? We're actually making communion all about us, all right? Think about that, right? What are we saying? We're saying, oh, I need to be good with God, yeah. So I need to feel good. I need to feel right. So I'm going to take communion, or I'm going to go to heaven now. So, like I need to get that squared away so I can get to heaven, and that's going to be sweet. I don't want to go to hell, so I'm going to take communion, or now I got Jesus inside of me, and so it's kind of like this magical thing that we think, that we kind of trick ourselves into thinking that, like, all right, his like body and his blood's like in me, and so he's going to heal me, or I'm going to win my next game, or it's going to be like really, really, really good luck for me this week, or I'm going to be successful at work, or that that deal's going to go through. Like, that's what we think. But when we do that, we're actually turning communion into all about us. It's actually the exact opposite of what Jesus is saying here about what communion is actually supposed to be. We're supposed to do this to remember him. We're supposed to do this to remember, all right, for us, it's remembering back to what he did. It's actually a very serious, very personal, it's a very thankful thing. Think about it. The God of the universe came down to the dirt to die for you. And that should mean something to you. Like, that should stir some emotions inside of you. And he's saying it's good for us to remember that. It's good for us to reflect that because we are prone to forget. And so I want us to do that today as a church family. And before we jump into this, I want to reiterate some things that Mike has said earlier. Communion is only for those that have given their life to Jesus. So, all right, the Bible really breaks this up into two groups. It says there's people who have given their life to Jesus and have a relationship with Jesus, and there's people that haven't done that yet or haven't done that. And so I'm just saying, if you are the second person there, if you have not given your life to Jesus, if you can't remember a moment in your life where you surrendered to him, right? Where you had that conversation with him, where you invited him into your life. If you can't remember doing that, all right, and you might be here and you're just kind of searching, you're just trying to figure things out. And so that's good for you to be here. We want you to be here. All right, this is a great place for you to be. There are answers to your questions, and you could bring your hurt and you could bring your pain. We'll take it. But don't take communion. It's not for you. It's between Jesus and his followers. Now, if you are a Jesus follower and you have given your life to Jesus at some point, but today is just, I don't know, maybe you're distracted by something in your life, or maybe for you, you're just not in the right headspace, or you feel like you can't do this with the right attitude, or it's just not going to work out today, or you're just not there today. I'd also encourage you not to take it. In fact, Paul, one time he writes to the church in Corinth, he says, hey, just want to throw this out there. He says, hey, some of you guys, you're not taking communion with the right attitude. Okay, you're not remembering like you're supposed to remember. Some of you guys, you're just doing it to eat. You're doing it, some of them were like doing it to get drunk. You're doing it for all the wrong reasons. You're doing it because you're making it all about you. And Paul, he gets honest with them, brutally honest. He says, hey, I got really bad news. Like, some of you, God has punished. Some of you have died because you've taken this in the wrong way. It's kind of a scary thing. It's a very serious thing. And so even if you have given your life to Jesus, if you can't do it in a way that would honor him, if you got some major sin in your life that you just haven't dealt with yet, I'd say you don't take it either. You shouldn't. You should wait. Or if you're a kid and you haven't done that, it's not good for you to do this. Now, if you have, and you're in the right headspace and you could do this with the right attitude, right? We're going to do this real quick. And again, if you haven't, all right, you could just hold on to the packet. If you're not there, you haven't made that decision, or you got stuff going on in your life right now, whatever that might be, too distracting, just hold on to that packet and just throw it away after the service. All right, that's all you got to do. You won't be the only one, okay? But for those of you that have, you are ready. I want to give you a few minutes to get your heart right with God. All right, give you a few minutes to confess if there's anything in your life that needs confessed. All right, if there's anything in your life that's in your way between you and God, I want to give you just a few minutes to take care of that right now before we do this. It's a serious thing. Let's pray. Luke said Jesus took the bread. He gave thanks and he broke it and he gave it to them. He said, this is my body which is given for you. do this in remembrance of me. Let's go ahead and peel back the layer before the bread, and let's take this together, and let's take a minute and let's remember his body that was broken, bruised, and beat for us. Let's take it together as a church family. Luke says in the same way, Jesus also took the cup after supper. He raised it up. He said, hey, this is the cup of my new covenant, meaning this is a new deal. They didn't understand this yet. They didn't get it. But he says, this is a new deal in my blood, which is poured out for you. And so let's flip it over and let's take the cup together. And let's remember about his blood that poured out for you and for me on that cross. I was thinking this week, I wonder what it felt like when the disciples did this the first time after Jesus had left. You ever think about that? Like what that was like? The emotions that they had as they think back to this night and what Jesus was telling them that they clearly didn't understand about what was about to take place. As they think back of the memories, they finally understand. As they think back to this night, Jesus' last night. John says that, who was there, he says that as Jesus was doing this, he was clearly troubled. Like, he was like grieving. And the disciples, they couldn't figure out, they didn't understand what was going on. And the reason why Jesus is grieving is because he knows that one of them that are there is going to betray him. In fact, this bothers him so much that Jesus, he kind of bursts out. I mean, he says, look, right, the hand of the one betraying me is at the table with me. He's talking about Judas. He says, for the Son of Man, that's Jesus, will go away as it has been determined. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. It's interesting because, I feel like a lot of us, we grow up in church, and we view Judas as like, evil, which he was, okay? We view Judas as like evil, like the sinister, shadowy figure among the disciples. He's got the shifty eyes and little horns. He's super shady, kind of like Jim Harbaugh. I could still dog him a little bit. He'll have to carry that around with him a little while. Like he was like he hissed when he talked type thing. Like that's how we view Judas. But when Jesus tells them that someone is going to betray them, it's interesting. What do they not do? They don't all go like, oh, it's Judas. Oh, we know it's obviously that would be Judas. They don't do that. They don't all look at him. Right? The disciples like, who would ever do that? No, none of us in this room would do that. Maybe, Jesus, maybe you just don't know us as good as you think. And so they begin arguing among themselves. Which of them could be, right, or which of them it could be who is going to do it. I mean, here they are. Jesus is having this special moment where he's like, hey, guys, I want you to remember, we're going to do this thing from now on. All right, it's super different to them. They're like, can you do that? And he's like, no, we're doing this. I want you to remember me and what I'm about to do. He's talking about suffering. He's talking about his body is going to get beat and broken. He's talking about blood and all this stuff. And it's kind of this special moment. And they've already forgotten. This is just minutes later. They've already forgotten. They're arguing amongst themselves about which one it could be. And then a dispute also arose. I mean, this is like intense. They're like really mad at each other about who should be considered the greatest. I mean, just think about this real quick. These are the guys that Jesus is going to use to start his movement. These guys, right? These are the guys. I mean, this is what Jesus had to work with. Like, this is it. Like, this is who Jesus is trusting to remember and to tell everybody about who he is. Again, this is Jesus' last night. And Jesus, he turns to them. And sometimes I think Jesus is just like, oh, you guys are killing me. You know, I think he just turns to them. He says, now, guys. The kings of the Gentiles lord it over the Gentiles, and those who have authority over them have themselves called benefactors. What he's saying here is a little confusing. All right, he's telling them this idea. He's like, hey, the rich and the elite, they rule, okay? And once in a while, they'll like be generous with something, and then we call them generous, right? Today, it's kind of like this, how we have government officials that are like the government, like the elite, the ruling class that are over us, you know, little people here. And what do we call them? We call them public servants, right? Like that's what they're called. But what are they doing? They're serving, sure, they're serving, but they're also serving to get something in return. They get power, honor, and wealth in return. Same thing back then. What Jesus is saying is he's saying, hey, that's how the world works. That's how this is. The way people live their lives in the world, we do whatever we possibly can to kind of move ourselves up in the world. And so when we serve, it's for a purpose. When we're generous, it's to get something in return. But Jesus looks at them. He says, no. That is not to be like that among you. He says, on the contrary, whoever is the greatest among you should be like the youngest or the lowest, and whoever leads like the one serving. What he's saying here is he wraps up this night. He's saying, you guys need to serve. Remember, he just demonstrated this. He just went around the table and he did the lowest job. He washed all of their feet. And he's saying, you guys need to serve in a different way than the world teaches. You guys need to serve in a way that you expect nothing in return. We're to serve just like Jesus served this bickering group of guys. And one of the guys, Peter, he stands up. And he's like, no, Jesus, all right, I'm good with serving. All right, that's cool. I'm also like your most loyal Jesus follower here. At one point, he looks at everybody, he says, even if all of these fall away, Jesus, I'm with you. I would never betray you. It can't be me. I would never do this. Like, I'm in this to win it. I'm like, ride or die with you, Jesus. I remember everything, all right? You don't even have to worry about me forgetting because there is no chance I ever forget. And Jesus turns to Peter in front of everybody. And he says, Simon, all right? He said, Peter, he says, look out. You don't understand, man. He says, Satan has already asked to sift you like wheat. He's already asked to take you down. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And you, when you have turned back, here's Jesus. He's saying, I'm praying for you that your faith will not fail. But here he is. He's saying, but you will fall. And when you fall, actually he tells all of them, he says, all of you guys are going to abandon me, right? But here he is, he's saying, when you turn back and when you remember, I want you to strengthen your brothers. Lord, he told him, he's like, no way. I'm ready to go with you, both the prison. I'm cool with prison. I'll go to prison for you, Jesus. I got no problem with it. I would die for you, Jesus. That's what he's saying in front of everybody. And Jesus turns to him, he says, I tell you, Peter, that the rooster will not crow today until you have denied me 3 times, that you even know who I am. And at that, Peter drops it. And the disciples are filled with shame, filled with denial, they're filled with embarrassment. This was supposed to be a fun night. They're supposed to hang out, they're supposed to eat with each other, they're all looking forward to this. Jesus was like craving it, all right? And here's Jesus, he's so serious. He keeps talking about death and suffering and blood and body being broken and saying that, you know, and the disciples are like, and saying that we aren't loyal and acting like we won't remember him. Like, what is he talking about? In fact, the Bible tells us that they are grieved, like this bothers them. But what they don't understand is that they are a lot like us, that they would struggle to remember, just like Jesus warns. Because we know how that is. Right? Like, we know. As life goes on, our schedule gets busy. As we get older, we don't remember to remember. And that's a problem. See, and the disciples, they're confused, and they're getting ready to head out for the night, and Judas, he's working behind the scenes with the religious leaders to take Jesus down, and he's like, this is the night. We could do this tonight. And the stage is set, and we'll pick up there next week. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this, Lord. We don't remember to remember. So often we live our lives. We get stuck in our rut. We get stuck, focusing on all these little unimportant things in our lives. Lord, we forget you. And we forget about what you do. We know that this stuff happened, and a lot of us, we know about it. We just don't think about it much. It doesn't affect us much. It's not how it's supposed to be. God, we ask that you would help us to remember, help us to think about it. Keep it, what you did for us, on the forefront of our mind. You forgave us. I mean, it's great news. It's the best news ever. You came down to the dirt to die for us, just for the chance of an opportunity with us. And God, if there's anybody in this room that hasn't taken that, they would begin that relationship with you today. Lord, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.